He counted them twice, sure he was dreaming. Every horse was there. The bay mare was the first one I lost count on. I'd been standing at the fence rail since before light, the way I'd been doing most mornings that winter, and I got to 14 and then my mind just slid off sideways and I had to start again. 14, 15, the gray with the scar on her hip. The two young roans I'd bought off a Comanche trader the fall before, still half wild, still not right with strangers. 18, 19, 22. I stood there a while longer, watching their breath steam up in the cold, and I thought, that's right. That's all of them. I knew it was. But I stayed at that fence until my hands went numb, because the counting was the only thing I could hold onto that stayed still. My name is Callum Price. I was 51 years old that winter. I had a horse ranch on the southern edge of the Cimarron country, 180 acres of hard grass and red clay that I'd spent 23 years building into something that worked. I had a good barn, 2 solid hired hands, a bunkhouse that didn't leak, and a reputation for horses that people came a long way to buy. I had all of that. What I didn't have anymore was Dora. She died in September. Fever. Came on fast, went faster. 17 days from the first morning she said her head hurt to the morning I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and knew she was gone. You can know something and not know it at the same time. I stood in that doorway a good long while before I walked in. People said things after. The usual things. The minister. The neighbors. Men I'd done business with who rode out specifically to shake my hand and look at the ground when they did it. I heard all of it, and it went in and out of me like wind through a broken window. What I remember from those weeks is mostly the feeling that the ground wasn't sitting level. Like something had shifted under the clay and everything was canted just enough that I couldn't find flat footing. By winter I wasn't sleeping right. I'd go down sometime after midnight and be up again by 3, and I'd go to the fence and count the horses. I don't know when that started. I don't know what I thought I was checking for. Loss, maybe. Whether something else had gone. Whether the thing that took Dora was still moving around out there in the dark, helping itself. The hands, Tomas, and a boy named Eli we'd hired on in the spring. They didn't say anything about it. I could tell they were watching me careful. Men do that. They watch and they don't say a word, and they work harder to cover for what they see, and they hope whatever's wrong with you straightens itself out before it gets bad enough to name. It got bad enough to name. January. I was in the barn doctoring the gray mare's hoof. She'd picked up a stone bruise and it had gone sour on her, and I was kneeling there in the straw with her leg between my knees, and I looked up at the square of light that was the barn door, and I saw Dora standing in it. Just for a second. Shape of her, the way she held her shoulders, the particular tilt of her head when she was looking for something. Then it was just the light. I went back to the hoof. I finished what I was doing. I put the mare's leg down and I stood up and I walked to the barn door and I looked at the yard, and of course there was nothing there but the yard. Tomas was over by the woodpile splitting logs, the smoke from the house chimney going straight up in the still air. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a while without doing anything. That was the first time. There were others, not every day, not even every week, but they came, a shape in the doorway, the sound of her moving in the next room. Once at the fence in the early dark, I was certain I heard her say my name from somewhere behind me, her voice, her particular way of saying it, the way she'd put the second syllable down a half step. And I turned around fast, and there was just the dark and the cold and the horses shifting their weight in the pen. I am not a man who frightens easy. I want that known. I spent 3 years with the cavalry before I came west. I've been on the wrong end of a rifle twice and walked away from both. I've pulled calves in blizzards and put down horses I loved and buried men I respected, and none of it broke me. But those months, that winter, I was genuinely afraid that I was coming apart. That something in my mind had gone soft, gone wrong, and was not going to come back. I didn't tell anyone. Nora Aldecoa had the small place a mile and a half east of mine. She'd come to that country 4 years before with her husband Felix, a quiet Basque man who worked hard and kept his word, and died of a bad heart 2 years after they arrived. They had no children. She stayed, kept the place going herself mostly, had a small kitchen garden, kept chickens, did mending and washing for a few families in the area. She was maybe 45. Solid, not big. Dark eyes, dark hair going to gray at the temples. She had a way of being still that I'd noticed before Dora died, but never paid much particular attention to. After Dora died, she brought food, the way women do. She brought it 3 times that first month, left it on the porch when I wasn't there to answer, left it with Tomas when I was out in the pasture and didn't come in. She didn't make a production of it, didn't leave notes, didn't stand around waiting to be thanked. The 4th time she came, I was at the kitchen table when I heard the boots on the porch step. She knocked. I said, "Come in," and she came in with a covered dish that turned out to be a lamb stew, and she set it on the table and looked at me. I must have looked bad. I know I hadn't slept right in 3 or 4 nights by then. I know I hadn't been eating much. She pulled out the chair across from me, and she sat down. I said, "You don't have to do that." She said, "Do what?" I said, "Sit. You can just leave it." She said, "I know I can," and she sat there. We didn't talk for a bit. Then she said, "When did you last sleep?" I told her I slept fine. She looked at me the way a woman looks at a man when she knows he's lying and has decided not to argue about it right now. We ate the stew. She ate with me. I hadn't eaten with anyone since September, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to have another person across the table, the small sounds of it, the warmth of another body in the room. She left when it was full dark. I went to the fence and counted the horses, and then I went inside and slept until 4 in the morning, which was better than I'd done in weeks. She came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. It became a thing, though we never agreed to it out loud. Tuesday evenings she'd come with something and we'd eat it together, and after a while we started talking. Not about Dora, not about Felix, just talking. About the horses, about what the winter looked like, about a dispute one of the eastern ranchers was having with the territory office over water rights. Small talk mostly, the kind that fills a room without pressing on anything. I was grateful for it in a way I couldn't have put into words. It was like a rope tied to something solid, one thing I could count on in the week, the same as counting the horses, something still. It was February when I told her. I don't know why I did. We'd been sitting at the table after supper, and she was mending something. She'd taken to bringing her mending, which I hadn't asked her to stop and didn't want to, and I was looking at the lamp, and I heard Dora's voice again. Just the way I had outside at the fence 2 nights before, plain and close and wrong, and I must have done something with my face because Nora looked up from her mending and looked at me. She said, "What is it?" I sat there a minute, then I told her, all of it, the shapes in doorways, the voice, the certainty I was losing something that didn't grow back once it was gone. I told her the way a man tells something he's been carrying alone too long, not looking for comfort, not looking to be talked out of it, just needing it to be somewhere outside of him for a minute. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't get a look on her face like she was frightened of what she was hearing. When I was done, she was quiet for a bit. Then she said, "After Felix died, I heard him for almost a year, in the barn, in the morning before I was fully awake. I thought the same thing you're thinking." I said, "What happened?" She said, "It stopped." Just that, no explanation, no comfort attached to it, just it stopped. I nodded. I didn't say thank you, it wasn't that kind of moment. But something in my chest eased, very slightly, the way a knot eases when you work it just right, not undone but looser. March came in hard that year. Cold holding, north wind with ice in it, a week of it before it broke. The young roans didn't like it, kept running the fence line, and I was out checking them in the late afternoon of the worst day when I slipped on a patch of mud under the snow and went down wrong on my left leg. Heard something in my knee. Felt it. Got up, tested it, put weight on it and almost went down again. By the time I got back to the barn, I knew it was bad. Tomas saw me come in and didn't say anything but got my arm across his shoulders without being asked and got me to the house. I told him to go get Nora. She came. It was near dark by then and she came on horseback fast with her bag. She'd done some nursing. Her husband had been sickly in his last year and she'd learned some things, had what she needed. She got me onto the kitchen table, I don't know how. She was not a large woman but she managed it, and she looked at the knee and then she got to work. She worked on that knee for a long time. Setting things, wrapping things, me with my teeth together, not making much noise but not none either. When she was done, she stood back and pushed her hair off her face, and she said the leg needed to stay still for at least 2 weeks and probably 3. I said, I can't do 3 weeks. She said, then you'll make it worse and lose the rest of the winter too. We looked at each other. She was right and I knew she was right and she knew I knew. She said, I'll come every day. I said, you can't do that. She said, I'm deciding what I can do. Very flat, not unkind, just clear. She came every day. Not just to check the knee. She did everything. She cooked. She worked with Tomas and Eli on the horses. She knew horses, her husband had kept a few and she'd worked them herself since he died. She knew which of mine were right and which needed watching. She rode the fence line and whether I didn't want to think about a woman being out in, and she came back with reports the same as any hand I'd have hired. She kept the whole place running while I sat in that kitchen and hated myself for it. About 10 days in, I told her she had to stop, that I'd pay someone to come in. That it wasn't her job to nursemaid a man she barely knew. She stopped what she was doing. She was at the stove, stirring something, and she turned and looked at me. There was a long silence. She said, I know what I'm doing, Callum. Something in the way she said it, not explaining, not defensive, just stating it. I said, what do you mean by that? She set the spoon down and came to the table and she stood there and looked at me for a moment, and then she put her hand on the side of my face. That's all. Just her hand, flat against my cheek, dry and warm. She looked at me straight. She said, you're not someone I can walk away from. I don't know if you understand that yet, but I know it. I sat with that. With her hand on my face and the smell of whatever was on the stove, and the sound of Tomas out in the yard. I said, Nora. She said, don't say you don't deserve it. I didn't ask you. She took her hand back and went back to the stove. I sat there for a long time after that, just with the feeling of it. Like when you've been out in the cold so long you forget what warmth feels like and then you're back inside and your hands start to hurt because the blood's coming back into them. That kind of thing. A little like pain. A lot like being alive again. The knee took 3 weeks, near enough. Then another week of going slow before it was right. She was there most of it. Not all day, not every hour. She had her own place to manage, and she was not the kind of woman who hovered, but she was there. Mornings, usually. Sometimes evenings. She and Tomas developed some kind of understanding about the horses that I wasn't entirely part of, which I didn't mind. Spring came in the first week of April. The roans settled down. The gray mare's hoof healed clean. I got back to full work by mid-month, the knee sore in the cold but holding. One morning I went to the fence before light the way I'd been doing all winter and I counted the horses. 14, 15. The gray, the roans, 18, 19, 22. I stood there, and then I noticed that I hadn't heard Dora in a while. I didn't know when it had stopped. Sometime in those weeks when Nora was there every day. Sometime in all of that. I stood at the fence in the first gray light and I thought about that, and I thought about what Nora had said, it stops, and I thought about her hand on my face. I went inside and made coffee, and when it was full light, I rode over to her place. She was in the yard feeding the chickens when I came through the gate. She looked up and watched me get down and tie the horse to the post. She waited. I said, I counted the horses this morning. She said, how many? I said 22, same as always." She nodded like that was the right answer. I said, "I'd like you to keep coming over." She looked at me. There was a small quiet between us, the chickens moving around her feet, the light coming in low and gold over the top of the barn. She was looking at me the way she had that day at the kitchen table when she put her hand on my face straight, without any pretending, without softening it. She said, "I know, I've been coming over." I said, "I mean, I'd like to give you a reason to, a real one if you'd have it." She stood there a moment, her eyes on mine. Then something in her face went a little easier, very slightly, like a thing she'd been holding onto had been set down. She said, "I'd have it." I crossed the yard and she put her hand in mine, and we stood there in the morning light with the chickens complaining around us, and I held her hand and didn't let it go. I don't have a lot of fine words for what happened after that. We didn't make it complicated. We were both too old for complicated, and we'd both already lost things we couldn't get back, and we knew better than to waste what was left of it. We married in June, small. The minister, Tomas, and Eli, two neighbors. Nora's garden was coming in by then, and someone had cut wildflowers from the pasture edge and put them on the table in the church, and that was enough. She moved into the ranch house. Her chickens came too. The roans were still nervous around her at first, but she worked them patient and slow, and by August they were eating from her hand. I still go to the fence most mornings. Old habit. The light coming up, the horses moving, the count. 22, same as always. But these days I come back inside where it's warm, and she's there, and the coffee's on, and the morning's got a shape to it again. That's what I wanted to say. That's the whole of it.